Welcome to the Weekly Takeaway, what you need to know from the news. And the first thing you need to know is that we finally have a week over the last couple of months with stories that don't start with "and in more coronavirus news." So we've got a bunch of stuff to talk about today, and there are things happening. Today seems to be a day where the news dam broke, and we've got all kinds of stuff. I'm going to share some of it with you today, and I hope that it will be a help, and we will look at these stories. We do have more from the COVID-19 desk. You have to start there, but we'll move from there to the story that coronavirus will not kill. It's killing everybody, everywhere, all over the world. There's one story, it will not kill, keeps coming back. Then voter fraud on display. We are not even pretending anymore. And finally, for our heartwarming story of the day, a Joe Biden story that certainly will warm your heart. Our first story today from the COVID-19 desk begins with an op-ed found in the New York Post entitled simply, "It Needs to End Now." And how often does an op-ed make the front page of the New York Post? It did. This op-ed by David Marcus. I want to read a little bit of it to you because it speaks so well to the takeaway from this story and all that's happening around COVID-19 and the coronavirus and the lockdowns and everything else we've been experiencing for the last couple of months. This article, again, found in the New York Post, says this: last Friday morning, some 3,500 New Yorkers lined up at a Catholic church in Queens to receive free food hours before it even opened. That's an important thing to understand there. 3,500 people hours before it even opened. Catholic Charities has reported a 200% increase in demand over the past month and a half. By prolonging the coronavirus shutdown long after its core mission was accomplished, Governor Andrew Cuomo and Mayor Bill de Blasio have plunged tens of thousands of New Yorkers into poverty. It needs to end now. And this op-ed goes on and explains how many businesses in the city of New York, small businesses, family-owned businesses, will never recover because of this government-imposed lockdown. It needs to end now. Another story found in the Blaze this morning is entitled this: California doctors say they've seen more deaths from suicide than coronavirus during the lockdown. Again, this is in the Blaze. I'll read just a portion of it to you. Doctors in Northern California say that they have seen more deaths from suicide than coronavirus during the lockdown. Doctors and nurses at the John Muir Medical Center in Walnut Creek say that during the duration of the COVID-19 quarantine, they have seen more deaths from suicide than the coronavirus. The numbers are unprecedented. Dr. Mike DeBasablanc of John Muir Medical Center in the Bay Area told KGO-TV, "We've never seen numbers like this in such a short period of time. I mean, we've seen a year's worth of suicide attempts in the last 4 weeks." This leads me to a very important takeaway as we consider all that's happening in the news right now. Two things can be true at the same time. It's amazing we're living in a world where intelligent people, apparently educated people, do not understand that two things can be true at the exact same time. I've been talking about this for weeks. The fact that there are these unintended consequences of the lockdowns and all that is being pushed on us as a society by a government under the guise of safety. The government is saying we need to keep you safe, therefore you need to stay locked in your homes, therefore these unintended consequences are taking place. And we saw just a couple of these in the stories that I just read. Businesses being shut down, folks who have no access to basic things like food and shelter because they no longer have jobs. There are those that would say, well, we have a safety net in place and the government will take care of us. For many, many people in the United States, that is absolutely not true. Small businesses that just cannot continue to operate, and on and on and on we go. And then that leads us to the mental health issues. So many folks who are struggling, people who should not be isolated, forced into isolation, and in the midst of that see no hope but to end their lives. Two things can be true at the same time. The takeaway is this: the health issues, those are true. No one is arguing that coronavirus, COVID-19, and the associated illnesses are true and real and damaging and have ended lives. We know that to be true. But we also have to acknowledge that at the same time as that truth, there's another truth. That is the economic truth. That is the lifestyle truth. That is the fact that many people will never recover because they have been forced into isolation. Don't ever forget that two things can be true at the same time, and those in authority, those in leadership, need to consider both truths, one in each hand, while deciding how to move forward. I believe that in many places, Americans have just decided that they would consider those two truths on their own and make decisions based on what is impacting them more as a family and more as individuals. It's happening. But things are not always one or the other. And what a great example we're seeing in this first story from the COVID-19 desk this morning. And in other news, there is at least one story that the coronavirus will not kill. What an amazing time to be alive. For the last 2 months, there has only been one story. If you talk to a neighbor behind a mask, 6 feet apart, don't get too close. That's dangerous. But if you talk to a neighbor, if you watch the news, if you listen to the news, if you pick up a podcast, whatever it is, wherever it is, you're consuming information. It's all about coronavirus all the time. It's as if nothing else is happening anywhere on the planet. But there's at least one story that has not been affected by the coronavirus. This week, a subpoena in the case of Hunter Biden was authorized for Senate investigation. This is crazy. It's crazy that it's continuing. You remember Hunter Biden. He's the son of former VP Joe Biden, who is currently running for president of the United States, if you could call it running. He's walking kind of behind a walker, it seems like right now. That's another story. We'll get to it later here in just a second. But his son, Hunter Biden, has had some shady dealings, particularly with the Ukraine energy company called Burisma. You remember, before coronavirus was the only thing happening in the entire world, we were being convinced by the mainstream media and the Democrats in control of the House of Representatives that Donald Trump was doing some dirty business in Ukraine. Turns out in the process of that investigation, we have learned that Hunter Biden was the one who really should be investigated, but so much of that has been pushed away. Well, Senate Republicans finally authorized a subpoena so that his actions, that is Hunter Biden's, in Ukraine with Burisma would be investigated. And this is an interesting story for so many reasons. With all the things going on in the news, what I try to convey is that there are some stories that speak to who we are as Americans and speak to who we are fundamentally, what we believe. And this is one of those stories for this reason. Here's the takeaway. We see stories like this one, and often we just turn a blind eye to it, or we step back and conclude that nothing will happen. I know I do it. When I hear about someone like Hunter Biden or some powerful politician being investigated, I simply conclude that nothing will happen because they are of the ruling class. Now, we're not supposed to have a ruling class in the United States, but we certainly do. We all understand that. The takeaway from this potential investigation, we'll see how it all unfolds, is that the president is not all powerful. And therefore, he is all important. The president is not all powerful, and therefore he is all important. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. We have seen this on display throughout the Trump administration, and in particular cases like this one. The president of the United States, although he's viewed as the chief executive of our country, is not all powerful. Although he can rule by executive order to some degree, there are limitations on his power. Our president is one who takes to social media and tells the entire world exactly what he's thinking all of the time. The things he would do if he could, the things he'd like to do if he could get people behind him, and yet often, because he's not all powerful, he can't do it. But what the president can do and has done is put judges in place and put legislatures in place and fill his cabinet with individuals that can ensure, to the extent that they're able, that the rule of law applies to everyone. The president cannot do simply whatever he would like to do. But what he can do is put people in place that can represent the people that he was elected to represent. This is an important takeaway. When we look to our election, we look to the voting even on a president, and we say, well, the president doesn't have the power that we would like for him to have. He can't do everything that we would like for him to do. Here's what we need to understand. The fact that he can't rule by executive order is the exact reason we need the right president in place, because what he can do is put individuals in place who are not elected by us, but are chosen by him who was elected to represent our best interest. We'll see what happens with Hunter Biden, but one thing we learn when those of the ruling class are placed under investigation is that there is still hope for the rule of law and justice. Speaking of the rule of law, we are seeing on display voter fraud in our country, and we're not even pretending anymore. There is a push, I'm sure you're aware of this, for the general election in November to be held entirely by mail-in ballot, again, under the guise of security. Because coronavirus is so deadly, we cannot have people going to a voting booth and voting in person. Otherwise, they will pose a health hazard to themselves and others. Now, you can go to Walmart if you need to. You can go to the grocery store. You can go to the gas station. You can do all of those things. But the most important thing a citizen of the United States can do, it's just too dangerous. Now, don't forget, people have died for our right to stand in a voting booth and cast our vote for the person we think should be the president or whatever it is we're voting for. People have died to defend these rights, but it's far too dangerous for us to go and do this in person. Or so we're being told. And so we're being told that the solution is an easy one. Everything can be done by mail-in ballot. What could possibly go wrong? The Heritage Foundation issued a wonderful publication on this and helps us to understand that the United States, I'm reading from the Heritage Foundation publication on voter fraud, that the United States has a long and unfortunate history of election fraud. It goes on. I would encourage you to take a look at that. You can find it on the White House's site, whitehouse.gov. It gives some statistics here, though, and this is what I want to point out to you. 1,071 proven instances of voter fraud. 938 criminal convictions, 43 civil penalties, 74 diversion programs, 8 judicial findings, and 8 official findings. And this is just what we know about. Voter fraud is nothing new. It happens. There are many examples, even in the news right now, of voter fraud taking place. We know it happens. But rarely have we seen voter fraud so unashamedly being pushed on the American people. Governors in states that would seek to elect someone other than our current president in the next general election are pushing with both hands to have their general elections in their states be held only by mail-in ballot. We need to be very careful when we hear these things, and we need to defend, as much as we would defend any of our other rights as Americans, we need to defend the right that we have as Americans to vote. There's a takeaway in this, and I think it's very, very important. We must constantly be vigilant, ensuring that our voices will be heard. Again, we see this on display right now in the United States, our voices being heard. The government said do this. Many Americans have said we're not doing it anymore. Voices will be heard. The thing that makes America great is that we are a democratic republic. We're a representative government. We're not a democracy in the truest sense. It's not mob rule here in the United States. We have the privilege, again, paid for by the blood of those citizens who have gone before us. We have the privilege to elect representatives who can represent us before the government, and they're supposed to, if they'll do it right, speak on our behalf. What a great privilege it is we have to do that. And yet when we talk about people playing games with the voter process, what we see are those that would seek to take away our voice as Americans. It is not representative if we did not elect duly and legally the people who are supposed to represent us. If you want a great example of this, look no further than to your county health officer, whoever that is in your county. Our entire country right now is being run by unelected county health officers. These county health officers, they're unelected. They were appointed by government officials to advise on issues of health within the county. They have been given the authority, not by us, but by those who put them there, given the authority to determine whether American citizens will have to stay in their homes, whether or not they can go to work and buy food and the other things they need to for their families or not. Unelected health officials. And who put them in place? Not us. Not we as Americans. We had no say in that, and they're therefore not representing us. That's a small example that's having an enormous impact on our country that we need to keep in mind when we think about the election. Why is the issue of mail-in ballots or in-person voting so important? Why must we get out and vote? Why are these things so central to who we are as Americans? Because our representative government is not representative if we did not elect the people that are standing in our place. And finally, speaking of voter fraud, Joe Biden this week, Vice President, former Joe Biden, now running to become the President of the United States, on a morning talk show made this statement, an offhanded comment. He said this: if you have trouble deciding if you are for me or Trump, then you ain't black. Now, he's being interviewed on a talk show that was hosted by a black man that was sympathetic, certainly, to Joe Biden's race and Joe Biden's cause. And in the course of that interview, he said, look, to all of your black viewers, if you're having a hard time deciding whether you're for me or for President Trump, then you ain't black. And to that we say, thank you, Joe. Thank you for being the arbiter of race in the United States. Thank you for clearing up how we can understand if someone is black or not black, only if they vote for you. There's a takeaway in there, I'm sure. I'll let you figure it out on your own. But I would say this: get beneath the headlines. Understand your principles and vote your principles. It's incredibly amazing. Incredibly amazing. I said it. It's incredibly amazing. To see a man who's running for President of the United States make a statement like that, and to immediately see folks come out and defend his statement. Get beneath the headlines. Understand your principles and vote your principles. So many stories going on right now. I'm thankful that they are. These are the stories that I believe are important for us to consider this week. But in all of it, understand there's more than you're being told. There's more than you see. Step back, figure out the takeaway for you and your family. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next time.